Hi there, I'm Jamie Wincup and welcome to this episode of B Street Smart Online. As you might know, I'm a driver in the Supercar Championship Series. I know how important it is to be on top of your game all the time when driving. And in this series, we'll take a look at what the implications are of driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or being distracted by texting and or talking on the phone. Today, we'll be joined by Dr. Ken Harrison, who flies as a trauma doctor with Care Flight, and who also works in the trauma department of Westmead Hospital in Sydney, and the acting inspector of the Police Crash Investigation Unit, Naomi Lyle. We'll start with Dr. Ken. In our last episode, we watched a recreation of a crash scenario where Tom was driving Joe and Grace home from a party. And while looking at a picture on Grace's phone for only a split second, he hits a motorbike rider and then slams into a tree. Dr. Ken, tell us what happened then.
Well, unfortunately and most seriously, Grace, the backseat passenger, was killed. When you're thrown through the windscreen and hit concrete road, it's not good. Brendan, the bike rider, has a severely broken leg. Tom, the driver, is physically okay. And Joe, the passenger, suffered a serious head injury. I want to concentrate on two of those now. I want to talk about Joe and also talk about Grace. So Joe will be taken to a trauma hospital by ambulance. It's not all the hospitals, only a few in Sydney are trauma hospitals, and they're set up to receive badly injured patients any time of day or night. When she arrives in the emergency department, she'll be met by a team of up to 10 people at times in what often appears to be a scene of barely organised chaos. This group of doctors, nurses and others will be working quickly doing many different simultaneously activities. They'll be taking off her outer clothes, often by cutting them off. They'll be attaching monitoring and doing observations, and they themselves often wear protective clothing which can be off-putting for the patients. Once they can examine Joe, one will be doing a quick assessment called a primary survey, and that's to work out what are the life-threatening injuries, and also they'll be asking questions of Joe and examining a head, a chest and a belly. Some blood will be taken by other members of the team, and somebody else may well be putting a needle in another arm. While all this is proceeding, the team leader may well be talking out loud about what is happening, what needs to be happening next, and what the findings are. This can be really off-putting for patients because it seems like everybody's talking about the patient rather than to the patient. But we know it's the best way to take care of them in this first instance. They need to see all the injuries and all the potential injuries, so that means checking all over the body, and this includes the back. So to do that without causing further problems, particularly if there's a fracture of the spine, they do a log roll. This involves the entire team getting together and slowly, carefully rolling the patient onto their side, and then somebody examining the whole way down the back slowly. X-rays are often taken next, particularly of the chest and of the pelvis, and often it's necessary or sometimes nice, because the patient is in so much pain, to actually anaesthetise the patient in the emergency department. So if that's done, then drugs are given and then a tube's put through the mouth into the trachea or the windpipe, and through that a patient can be ventilated until she's ready to be woken up, and sometimes that's weeks. Often another tube's put into the stomach and or tubes into the bladder as well. Most patients need lots of repeat examinations over this time, and the team needs to work out what's the plan for Joe, and they need then communicate that plan to the rest of the hospital. In order for her to leave the emergency department, they have to move the monitoring onto a bed, and if she's got wounds or fractures, they need to be fixed. And like a lot of patients, Joe will now go to get a CAT scan. This is a fancy X-ray that looks at all the soft tissues inside the body as well as just the bones. And it can look at your head or your belly or your pelvis, and most bad trauma patients get the whole lot looked at. So in order to do this, the patient's bed is slowly moved in and out of a donut-shaped machine, and whilst it's doing it, she's kept as still as possible. She may well require an operation, some on the belly, some on the head, some on the chest. The commonest ones are under broken bones. Joe has a broken thigh bone or a femur, and in order to fix this, a nail needs to be put down through the middle of it. This is just a way of holding the bone still for the months it takes to mend. Instead of having a plaster on the outside like a lot of people have, this will be a nail running down through the middle.
The middle of the bone.
The middle of the bone.
Yep.
So it's going to hurt going in, which is why you need an anaesthetic and you need an operation, and then it needs to come out at the end, like many months' time. Once she's had all the procedures that she needs then, she'll go to a ward which may well be intensive care. Many patients in that ward are kept sedated until their injuries can improve, and again, that can be a long time. They're often connected to many different machines, and many need blood transfusions. And this is one area where school students really can help. Once you're 16, you can donate blood up to 3 times a year, and it's one really real way that you can save patients' lives. A lot of schools organise this themselves. If your teachers haven't organised it, get onto them to organise it, because we need more blood transfusions, and you guys are some of the healthiest people around who can quite happily give blood. From there, patients eventually get better and go to other wards, and they can be there for variable lengths of time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, often have blood tests, often have other procedures. Most patients, and Joe will finally recover. Some need extensive long periods of rehabilitation. Some are never the same again because they've needed amputations or various other things. The other person I want to talk about is Grace. Her body will be taken to a mortuary, and there it will be stored in a cold room whilst the police, the coroner and the family discuss what should happen next. If there's any doubt about the cause of the death, or if there's suspicious circumstances, sometimes a post-mortem examination is conducted and various organs are examined to see if they can work out from them what actually caused her to die. But meanwhile, her family will have found out, sometimes by friends phoning, sometimes by social media, and to me that just seems wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes by just realising she isn't home and making inquiries, and sometimes by getting an awful knock at the door by 2 policemen to tell them the news. Over the next few days, they'll have to arrange a suitable time to come down to the mortuary to see their daughter, because they will need to officially identify her. And I can tell you that's something none of us as parents ever want to do.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Obviously, there can be some pretty serious consequences physically, even just taking your eyes off the road for a split second. Yep. And while the physical side of things is important, there are other consequences too. Naomi, can you tell us a little bit about what your job involves when it comes to road crashes?
Well, I've been in the police force for over 20 years. In that time, I've seen hundreds of crashes and investigated them.
Yeah. Okay, so we've seen what happens in the hospital. Tell us about the consequences for Tom now that he's arrested.
Okay, Tom will be given a breath test at the scene before taken to hospital for a mandatory blood and urine test. He will then be returned to the station where he'll participate in an interview. That's where it's his chance to tell us the side of the story and what's actually occurred. And then we will look at the charging process from that, what information he supplies. And the charges you're looking at are anything from manslaughter to dangerous driving. These offences look at a possibility of 7 years in jail.
Apart from jail time and the emotional stress on him and his family, are there any other issues that arise, such a criminal record for Tom?
Yes, people need to understand once you've got a criminal record, a lot of opportunities are lost. That includes employment, travel, different law, any different sort of occupation can prohibit you if you've got a criminal record, plus working with children, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor. Also, if you want to travel overseas, a lot of countries won't let you in once you've got a criminal record.
What are some things people should think about before they decide to drive a car?
You need to think about how you're feeling. So you're tired, have you had enough rest, have you had enough sleep prior to driving, have you been drinking the night before, alcohol stays in your system for some time. P-platers and learners have 0 alcohol blood limits. So if you're going to plan to go out somewhere and you are going to drink, you need to have another option of getting home. You can also be tested for drugs at any time on the road. You need to minimise distractions in your car, so your mobile phone, the radio, friends, things like that. You need to be able to respond to anything that's happening outside the car. Learners and provisional licence holders are not permitted to use a mobile phone whilst driving, and that includes talking, texting or looking at Facebook. And make sure your friends are well secured in the car, so have seat belts on, feet off the dashboard.
Feet off the dashboard.
Yeah, this is a real problem. With the advent of airbags, if you and a lot of young girls, young teenagers drive with feet on the dashboard, if an airbag goes off, it goes off like a World War II hand grenade, and that will get your feet, if they're on the dashboard, and push them behind your head.
Whoa.
And we've had young girls killed because of that, or had such severe pelvic injuries that they are never going to be able to have children or walk normally or, yeah.
Wow. Anything else to add to that, Naomi?
Yeah, also they need to stick to the road rules. So drive to your licence conditions. If you know your conditions, know what they are. And also at night in driving, you've got to watch out for animals on the road, especially in rural areas, so you know what's around. If you do have a kangaroo in front of you or something, brake safely, don't swerve.
Yeah. Do passengers have any responsibility when it comes to safe driving?
They do. They need to minimise the distraction in the car, so make sure that the driver can concentrate and isn't distracted by what they're doing through phones or music. If you're also in the position to influence the driver, so if you think they've been drinking, don't get in the car with them, don't get them to drive. Let them know if you feel unsafe, if they're driving too quickly.
Yeah. What should you do if you're involved in a car crash?
Okay, stop immediately, if possible, in a safe spot. Call 000 if anyone is injured, or the police if you think anyone is affected by alcohol or drugs, and be prepared for any emergency. So carry some basic equipment such as safety vests, first aid equipment and torch in your car, and you can also install the Emergency Plus app from the Fire and New South Rescue, which can assist to help you find your location in an emergency.
Yeah, nice. So Ken, let's take it back to the consequences of this crash. What can we do about it?
I think this is really important. In this circumstance, Tom had a licence, but he was still inexperienced. Anybody under 25 is an inexperienced driver. And it wasn't that he was really drunk, he just wasn't sober. And it wasn't that he was way over the limit and blind drunk. He was just a little bit over the limit. And it wasn't that he was making a call on his phone, he was just looking at another picture that somebody else had shown him.
All small things.
All small things, but each of those individually have caused the types of crashes that we've both been involved in for years and years. And when you put them together, it's a real recipe for disaster. And it just gets back to, you need to think about the responsibilities you have to limit the consequences that are going to happen to you.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot more to consider there, and all of this can just happen because of one distraction. Thank you, Dr. Ken Harrison and Acting Inspector Naomi Lyle for joining us today. Thanks, guys. On our next episode, we'll meet two people who suffered brain injuries from being involved in a road crash. Before we go, I'd like to thank Woolworths Petrol for supporting us and for being our presenting partners. For more information, please check out our website. Thanks for joining us today for this episode of Be Street Smart Online. We look forward to seeing you again next time.